Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Here
We
we
are
are. Here we are. We're live. Welcome to the Business Velocity through the Five Facets of Business podcast, where your journey to accelerated success begins. We're your hosts, Dave Newell and Hannah Panuski, where in each episode we dive deep into the five facets of business through conversations with business leaders and entrepreneurs. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness these facets can transform your operations and propel your growth. With our guests, we explore actionable insights and share stories of real businesses that have achieved remarkable results. Let's unlock the potential of your business together and achieve business velocity. Hannah Panuski, who are we talking to today?
Dave Newell. We are talking to Stephen Freeman. Stephen is the leader and founder of Kairos Digital, also a great friend, a marketing agency that's based in Jacksonville, Florida. Their team is focused on web development, digital advertising, video production, and graphic design. Kairos Digital's vision is to help good ideas come to life and good organizations do great things and good people become world-changing leaders for the glory of God. Stephen has been married to Caroline for 13 years, and they have 5 children, 3 biological and 2 bonus. We are so excited to have Stephen with us today. We've known him for a long time, and he has lots of great wisdom and nuggets of insight to share. Stephen, thanks for coming on our podcast.
Guys, thanks for having me. This is a blast. I'll take any excuse to hang out and talk with you two.
Yeah. Stephen and I are spirit animals, I believe is the term we would use.
Yeah. I don't know what animal it is, but we're the same one.
Exactly. But instant friends, connected instantly, and Hannah fits right into that crew as well. Just a little bit more like, don't do that, you guys. Don't break things. So, yeah. But yeah, Stephen, love the intro. Stephen is one of my go-tos in terms of just a friend, a leader, a dad, all things good people, good person doing good things in the world. So really excited to have you on the podcast. And I know we could talk about 100 different topics, but we really want to focus in on a couple things. But if you can, just give us the scoop real quick on Kairos, kind of what led you into leading a marketing agency, and what do you see kind of around the corner for you and the company?
Yeah. So Kairos is hitting 5 years this year. So we're still a relatively young company, but I've been in marketing for about 10 years and writing for about 12. So I came into marketing through the content writing aspect. So I'm a writer by trade, and ended up leading a team of writers at web.com, and then leading an marketing agency that needed to grow and scale. And so we grew them over the 4 or 5 years that I was there. And I just felt like I really wanted to walk into something where there was complete chaos, and there's nothing more chaotic than nothing. And so moving into entrepreneurship was like the ultimate adventure for me. So I got to start Kairos, and so I always say that Kairos Digital is a words first agency. So we always start with the marketing message itself, and so we'll any clients we work with, we make sure that we get their message and their story right. And so did 3 years as a story brand certified guide, and then stepped away to lead and grow the company. So like I was saying in our mission statement, the goal for the agency is to help like good ideas thrive, good organizations do great things, and then good people become world-changing leaders for the glory of God. And so part of that mission has always been to not exclusively rely on just W-2 contractors or just 1099 contractors and vendors, but to actually like form and develop a culture, and to form and develop teams, and to be that company where people can land and grow and feel safe and become really great leaders. And so that's really hard to do with contractors, because you don't have as much impact and influence in their lives. And so that's why we've chosen to go the W-2 route.
Yeah, that's great. You and I were talking a little bit before we hit the record button about the challenges of running and scaling an agency, whether that's marketing in any category, right? So you mentioned the words first. We worked with a lot of kind of Amazon marketing agencies. There's graphic design, website design, all sorts of. There's lots of different agencies, and all of which I think run into some of the same challenges. That scaling is difficult.
Yeah.
What have you found works for you? What have you found as some kind of bright spots? What have you found as like, man, if I could solve this thing, that would be transformative for my life?
I think usually when business leaders talk about scaling, they're talking about like systems and revenue and being able to say yes to new clients and kind of grow that that scalable growth of like, hey, we were doing 3 million and now we're doing 5 million, and that's scaling. And yeah, it absolutely is. You're right that marketing agencies have a hard time doing that kind of scaling because we are like, we're working with human capital, and anytime you work with human capital, like, you have to care about the people that you're working with. So you either have two choices. You can care about the people you're working with, or you can not care about the people you're working with. And it is easier to scale when you don't care about the people you're working with. It is harder to scale when you do care about the people you're working with, because there's just a lot more to factor in when you care about the soul and the heart and the emotions and the mind of the person that you're leading. And so, like, that form of growth of deciding that success and scaling means more revenue and more clients and more employees. Yeah, it's tricky. It'd be a lot easier if I just had 2 or 3 operators, like W2 operators, and everyone else was contractors, because it would be the leanest way to grow the fastest. Because if you don't like a contractor, you drop them. If you like working with a contractor, you keep working with them, and you keep on, like, it's easier to scale when the systems are kind of outsourced, and you can vet and you can flow those. But I decided early on that in addition to consistently and healthily growing the company, that there were other metrics that mattered. And so, like, we have 2 employees that put in offers on houses this last month, and so they're becoming first-time homeowners. That's massive. We've had, 2 newly married people join the team and, like, learn and grow. Like, I went on a paternity leave when we had our third born, and we got people that are safe enough to tell me when they're thinking about leaving the company, because they know that ultimately every employee is a volunteer, and if they ever want to do something else, they know that they're safe enough to tell me that they want to do something else. Like, we've had employees start their own companies, competing agencies. We did the logo for it. Like, we launched them and we helped them grow and launch what they wanted to do, because our first value in the agency is think of others first. And so, because that's the top priority, how we define scaling is different. What we define health and growth is a little bit different. But you're right that the process of getting, exponential growth out of a team of people in the marketing world it's a trick.
Yeah, there's one piece that you said in there, and Hannah, I'll let you jump in here in a second. But what a lot of the marketing agencies that we work with, to your point, from a scaling perspective, will outsource certain activities to EAs in the Philippines or Russia or Pakistan. Like, I've seen different ways to scale the people side of things while keeping costs as low as possible. A lot of that is international. A lot of that is international outsourcing in terms of the people talent, like, to execute particular tasks. So not making that decision, right? Not leaning in that direction, as you mentioned, like, helping people buy their first house and, start the journey of a married life. Like, how do you stay consistent in that? Because I would imagine there's a temptation sometimes to, yeah, but you know what, this is cheaper. If we could just do this, we could get, we could hit this number. But staying committed to that mission. And, I think I know the answer to this question because it's one of the things I value the most about you as a human. But I got to ask it anyways.
Yeah. There's kind of 2 answers. We do utilize contracts. It's not like every single person that we utilize is a W2 employee. It's not like we're trying to do everything in-house, but we've made the commitment that when, as much as possible, we try to utilize our in-house team. And when we can't, we bring in experts to be able to either white label or work with us. But the vast majority of the work is done in-house. So it is not such a firmly held principle that we refuse to utilize contractors. Like, we do. We did a logo project with someone, and we had to bring in a typographist. It was just a phenomenal person at fonts and, like, developing their own fonts. So there are a lot of things that we do need to bring in outside help for. But the hard truth is that when you set your values first, all of the other decisions become clear. And so it only becomes confusing and hard when you're not clear the standard operating procedure in terms of values of how you're going to operate. So for us, we have 6 core values in our team, and they're all active sentences of how we choose to think and how we choose to operate. So it's think of others first is the first one. Own the problem is number 2. And we set these as hierarchical. So we say, if you are ever not sure about a decision, start with 1, go through 6. The answer is probably in there. So it's own the problem. So it's think of others first, own the problem, do what we said is number 3. Make it better is number 4. Ask the stupid question is number 5. And the 6 is be fun under pressure. So 6 is 6 on purpose, because if 6 was number 1, we'd have a completely different culture. To say, my expectation of you is that when stuff gets crazy, you're fun under pressure. If that was our top value, it'd be very different than if our top value was to think of others first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That actually, so I was thinking about a moment ago when you were just talking about like, yeah, I mean, caring about the people first as you scale. What came to my mind is the several instances that I've had with clients who've talked about, well, we've gotten to the point now where like we need more clients. We're getting really scared. Our overhead is kind of breathing down our necks. And like, what do we do? And we kind of, get sort of penny pinchy or just fearful, I guess, about, what the next few months holds. But then to your core value of be fun under pressure, this all leads to a question, I promise. How do you, because inevitably with the work that you do, I know that there's probably longer extended contracts, but it generally is kind of like project based, I imagine. Like, how do you be careful about like planning for the future? What kind of care do you take? What do you, how do you, and if you don't mind sharing it, like, how do you kind of like forecast the future and ensure that you can kind of, maintain the fun when it feels like the pressure is heavy?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, so about 80% of our revenue is through our retainer work, and about 20% is through projects. So websites, videos, right, logos, stuff like that. But even our retainer projects, or even our retainer clients, they're not bound into annual contracts. Everyone is a 30-day opt-out. And that's been a philosophical decision that I made from the start, which is if someone is doing poor work, they deserve to be fired. Mm-hmm. Like if we're doing poor work, but we think we can hide behind a contract because they can't legally let us go, mm-hmm, we messed up 8 months ago, Mm-hmm. And so the 30-day opt-out is, it gives us enough of a runtime to be able to sort some stuff around. But it makes sure that we're staying on our toes to say it's our job to do what we said we would do and to make the data make sense, which comes into like reporting and client touch points and meetings and how often we're leading the client strategy. If we are doing poor work, if they're allowed to fire an employee, they should be allowed to fire a vendor. And so we always have that gun on the table for them. Now our client retention rate is really strong because our team does really good work, and clients don't often just terminate the contract. But it doesn't mean that like every single relationship sticks around forever. Sometimes 2 or 3 clients, within a 3-month window will decide to leave, and yeah, I got to go hit the pavement and like make sure that we're taking care of the team.
I think that's such a real struggle for so many agencies. Like, even if you are, largely retainer based, like I think when the pressure is on, being able to keep up the fun and being able to sort of like trigger, hitting the pavement. Like, what does that look like? Like, I have a plan for when things start to get tight. What do I do? I feel like that's something that's so, it's just so prevalent to know how to, what to do in that moment. Yeah.
And it tells me how I'm supposed to react too, because it is really easy for a leader who feels like the pressure of making sure the team is fed and make sure that like everyone's busy and everyone's well paid and mm-hmm. all that, to immediately forget that I'm also supposed to not just lose my brain and go into like type A, Enneagram 8 crunch crank mode and just bowl over everybody. He's like, no, this applies to me too. Like I'm also, if I expect my team to not become grouchy and snippy and unpleasant when there's a deadline, then when I've got a crunch on the sales side or the biz dev side or the financial side, then it's my job to lead them in that as well.
Yeah. We have the same 30-day opt-out in our contracts. I'd say we're 90% of our clientele is retainer based.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Like it's the same idea that like if we're not actually delivering the value that we said we're going to deliver, what I don't want to do is cripple you from going to get the thing that you need to get. Meaning, don't spend that money on us, spend the money on other people, and we'll help you find those people. We'll actually bring those people into the fold. And we've had that executed one time in the 100 clients that we've had over the last decade.
Yeah.
And it was just a huge shift took place in the work that they were doing, and it was an easy out, and we ended amicably. I still have lunch with the guy on occasion, right? Like it is a great way to say we also care about you, right? As a client, and we're not living in a fear-based world. We're not trying to manipulate this from a contract perspective. So I couldn't agree more in terms of that as a kind of value statement that also shows up in the contracts.
Yeah.
Right.
Because ultimately all of those decisions that you make in how you set your employee like contracts and how you would set your client contracts, they reflect the world you think exists. And and so like when we say to a client, you're legally bound to keep paying me because this contract protects me, it's telling me that I think the world is small and limited and that I don't really trust my team. And when I tell an employee that this is the non-compete clause, because I don't want you to go work for a competitor, it communicates to the world and to the employee that I think that there's only so many acorns in the forest and I've got to grab as many as I can. Otherwise, we're not going to be fine for the winter. And I just don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of acorns in the forest.
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, like living with that mindset is just so much healthier for your spirit as well.
Yeah.
I've thought about this a lot with like my creative pursuits as well, that like we often think that opportunity is a pie and there's only so much pie to go around, then there's no more pie.
Yeah.
But that's just not true. And also like choosing to live in the just wild idea that there is no pie and that there is opportunity. I would much rather lean into that. Like, sure, call me crazy or whatever, but I would much rather lean into that because it's just a better way to live and exist and to lead a company, to have that kind of like mindset about it. I mean, the other thing that I think we're talking about a lot of kind of tricky situations with, how do you balance taking care of like your people and then also your company, but then also like, how do you like to take care of yourself? Like, I would be curious, what are the things that you like to do to fill up your own cup?
Yeah. So I think the myth of entrepreneurship is that you trade a boss for no boss. They're like, oh, I'm working for someone else and now I'm working for myself, so now I don't have a boss. But it's really, really easy if you don't intentionally guard against it to trade one boss for 30 bosses. And all of a sudden now you are just running ragged, working for every single client that you've got, and every single prospect that wants to call you, and every single employee that wants to work with you, and every single contractor that wants to talk to you. And it's a lot, right? And so like philosophically deciding what is the most important thing and then setting aside time for it. So like the power to focus on what is most important is the thing which is going to separate like high achievers and healthy high achievers from dysfunctional high achievers. And so for me, like I go to work, and when I'm at work, I work. And when I commute home, like work sheds itself off on the drive home. And so when I show up, I have not spent all of my emotional resources on my entrepreneurial endeavors to where I have nothing left to give my family. Because I got 5 kids in the house. I've got 5 kids at home, and I'm a deacon and I preach in my church, and we host our small group every Monday night. And there's 30 people over doing that. Like if I spent all of my emotional reserves at work, then I'm not going to show up in the areas that really matter. Because the truth is that I could hire someone else to do what I do at Kairos. I cannot hire anybody else to do what I do at home. And so I have to be able to like have the reserves to show up emotionally and spiritually and physically and cognitively for my family. And so, having like really healthy boundaries between home and work is helpful. I choose to work from home 1 day a week, just so that I'm like nearby my family. I take a half day off once a month to spend special dedicated time with my 2 boys, with my 2 biological kids that are at the house during the day. And just making sure that the environment that you're setting up at work isn't so dysfunctional that it just grinds your soul. That's a hard way to live.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you're speaking to, I think, is really powerful. Right, there's a lot to be said about creating containers in your life. Right, so containers meaning clear boundaries, clear rules. What might seem like simple rules, but they're not simplistic, generally speaking. Right, so like even creating values in your company is a container. You're saying, hey, this is who we are. This is how we operate. Well, at least while we're in the confines of work environment, you can be who you want to be at home, but like here, this is how we operate. This is what we choose. And there's creating the rules, and then there's following the rules, right? So you mentioned like, well, when I go home, I don't, I'm focused on home. I didn't spend all my emotional energy at work. So it's like, I'm sure you created that rule to be dedicated as a dad, or even with the employees, like, here's our 6 core values. You do them in this order, like they're chronological. And then some days nobody follows the rules, right? Some days I don't follow, like I have similar rules in my own world. And like some days I'm really good about following those rules. I would say more often than not. And then there's some days where I'm not, right? So like, how do you kind of reconcile for yourself when you need to bend the rules and when you don't, or how could kind of how do you navigate that, both either individually or with your team?
Yeah. So like bending the rules is one thing. Trying to get away with breaking them is another. So like this last Friday, it's normally my work from home day. There's a lot of like work stuff that I'm working through in this season. And before, like once we got the older kids off to school, I told my wife, I was like, hey, I'm struggling with this spectrum here. On one hand, I have a lot to do at work and I know no one else is going to be in the office. And I like having a full day with no one else in the office, I know is going to help me. But I also don't want to build the muscle of anytime work gets hard, home is what bends. And so I just like laid that out before her, and she was like, yeah, honestly, we got this and this today. Like today is actually a great day for you not to be here. So yeah, with my blessing, like go and like do that. And so kind of like doing it in tandem with the other stakeholders that are involved helps check like what the bending rules have to look like to account around specific circumstances. But the other side of that is, what can I break and get away with and not get caught for? And the only way that like as an entrepreneur, it is so easy to just have secrets, like to just like, oh, this is how I do it, and this is what we're doing, and like here's my intentions, here's my plans, and I'm not going to communicate that to the team. Even people actively trying to communicate as open book as they possibly can, still stuff gets missed. So yeah, it's very easy for entrepreneurs to withhold information from the entire team because it's very difficult when they're trying to accurately and clearly articulate that to the team.
It's true.
But what I found is that process of trying to get away with breaking the values or like trying to find a way to not to appear to and also to not have to function with, the only way that gets rooted out is either privately, personally. So that's where you choose to open up yourself to accountability. So I have several like accountability groups and peer and business like coaching and peer groups that are like vitally important. I'm part of C12, and there's also an industry agencies that help support each other, and opening yourself up to those people to be able to speak into that area of your life. But that has to happen first privately, and then you're able to kind of work that out. The other way is when everything breaks and everything hits the fan and everyone sees what's actually going on. Those are the only two ways that behavior stops, is if you do it privately and on purpose with accountability systems, or eventually it breaks and it becomes public. And usually that involves losing clients, losing relationships, losing employees.
Yeah. Or losing personal and professional relationships. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you then, as the leader in your organization, or as a leader in your organization, when someone else is bending the rules, so to speak, and if they're doing the secretive rule breaking, what do you do? How do you navigate that, knowing that part of what you're creating is psychological safety, part of what you're creating is an environment, where you want people to thrive? And that's
one book I've been going through that I started reading at your recommendation, Dave, was The Art of Possibility.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic book.
So good.
I think it's like rule 10 or something about where like be the board, like to be the board upon which the game is played. And like that idea of first looking at it and saying, well, this is what is happening. You have to accept what actually is happening and look at it for what it is, not what you want it to be or what you wanted it to be. And then set yourself as the backdrop upon which that game is being played, and then ask the questions as the board rather than the strategist or as the piece that's next to it, right? Because it's easy to, like, if a bishop on the chessboard is threatening a knight and I identify as the knight or the queen, I'm like, oh, this thing is threatening me, right? But if you're the board, like, you're just objectively looking at how things actually are, and you're able to like own some of the responsibility of what's going on. So like if an employee is actively, intentionally trying to skirt the rules, my first question is, what system have we created where that seems like their best option is to circumvent? Like what systems or what like pressure are they feeling that makes that their choice, right? Because every system is perfectly engineered to get the results that it's getting. And so if there's someone in my company that is actively circumnavigating the rules, there is some level of responsibility that I hold as the person who created the game and created the room and decided who was in the room, right? And so it could point to our vetting process of hiring, or our onboarding, or how well we communicate our values, or how we enforce what we've communicated, or how I demonstrate, like, am I demonstrating what's going on? Like, am I demonstrating adherence to the core values? Does it seem like there are external pressures that are pushing them to choose this, right? So as a leader, I owe it to the team and I owe it to myself to first look at it through the lens of, I'm the board and I hold some responsibility for what happens in this room because I'm the one that built the room. And if it turns out that like it is just something that person is bringing in with them and they're choosing to break the rules, it's also my responsibility to make sure that the people who are in the room are the ones that should be in the room. And so it could be like additional training, additional accountability, performance plans. It could be termination, but like all of those can be done mercifully and with honor to the person, and in a way that honors their safety and the safety of the people that are around.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, speaking from like a, process consultant, like brain, like whenever I start working with the team, the pieces, the way the board is set up is so obvious to me. And I usually think to myself, like, well, it must then be obvious to the leader that I'm talking
you're just
to.
really smart.
It's not. It's not something people don't usually put themselves in that situation to say, like, well, one, the ownership piece of it, but then also the like, objective observation. Everything is so emotional when you are leading a company. And I understand that so much. I mean, we talked about our Enneagrams, and Dave and I talk about our culture indexes a lot. Like, I skew very much so toward the emotional, but if you can pull yourself into more of an objective viewer seat and view the board as it is, and also take ownership for the way the board is constructed, you're going to have a healthier emotional day and you will be able to make better decisions for the people that you pulled together. I think sometimes too, and I'd be curious to know if either of you, have come across this in a way, but I think sometimes when there's high pressure and somebody on the team is doing something that you disagree with, oftentimes it's the easy way out to say, like, well, there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Like they're trying not to do a good job, or they're sabotaging the team, or and I feel like it's just the lazy way out, to accuse someone on your team who you put there that they are somehow failing you.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there are, employees and contractors that unfortunately just sometimes don't fulfill the company values, don't fulfill their job descriptions. But what would you say to those leaders that, when emotions are high, when someone has messed up and they are starting to look at suspect the people on their team of letting them down, like, what are some other ways to reframe that and say, like, how can I, help them, or just think better of the people around you?
It's actually terrifying, like how much overlap there is between parenting and leading an organization. Like, it's a hard thing to talk about because no employee wants to feel like you think of them as their kid, right? But the truth is that, like, it's the same answer for if you have a kid who is doing something or disappointing you, or like doing something that they shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah.
Like, at every level, the human soul needs first to feel safe, and then second to feel loved, then to be trained in what they're responsible for, and then to be held accountable for what they're trained in, right? Like, those 4 levels are just really clear. And so anytime cortisol shows up in a leader's brain, learning and curiosity stop. And anytime cortisol shows up in an employee's brain, learning and curiosity stop. Like, your brain it's not possible for your brain to feel like it needs to survive and to also think strategically about the organization. Like you have to fill those first two categories before you can even talk about what they're trained for and what they're responsible for and what their scorecards are. They first, like, art of possibility, they talk about, giving the A, right?
Mhm.
Like you have to let people know that they are safe first, loved, valued, cared about, and then you can have those conversations. But like as a leader, if I was talking to a leader that was just like all in their feels about it, be like, you have to go into a timeout, man. Like you're not, you cannot see things clearly if you have cortisol in your brain. And the life of cortisol, it's like 8 or 12 hours, like, of how long it sticks around in your brain. And like you just, like, that's why sleeping on it is so important. It's like, as much as possible, to not act out of an emotional center. You can lead with emotion, but to behave and to act out of an emotional or a survival instinct of, this person is a threat, they're an existential threat to the organization, I need to treat them as a threat. Like leading from that like base brain perspective rather than executive function in your brain, it's just a really volatile, caustic way to lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to your point before, like we use the quote all the time, like the system is perfectly designed to produce the results that it's producing.
Right.
Right. And I think it's easy as a business owner or a business leader, manager, team lead, whatever that is, to take other people's behaviors personally.
Yeah.
To say like, oh, well, they're doing this because they don't believe in what we do. And like, this is a, to your point earlier, it's like, this is a framework I created or we created. It's like, and they're not living into it. Why don't they care about the organization, or why don't they care about, like, it's an unhealthy, unhelpful frame, right? More often than not, it's, well, what's happening in that person's life? We often use the terms like, what conditions are we creating? And you used a similar framing of, well, what are the conditions that we're creating to make that possible?
Yeah.
Right. Because it's often there's an environment that's happening around that context, and how are they interacting with that environment, and how can we support them through it? I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about this. Mostly, we do a lot of culture work with organizations. I think you are a culture champion in many ways. Like you're a culture we look to as an example of doing it really well. And so I think, as you said, there's a lot to be said about, values is like a perfunctory exercise. Like, this is a thing that we did. We know we're supposed to have company values, and so we did it. Yeah. Look at us. Yay, we put them up on the wall. There's 13 of them, and nobody can remember any of them. And we never really talk about it, but they're on the wall, and that's pretty cool. Right? And it's like, well, that doesn't actually do anything for you. I actually think that is a hindrance to team culture and performance, because you've basically said, like, these are things that we value, but we don't actually care about them.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there is something to be said about the delivery, the accountability, the holding space for values. And I think what you just said around how are we creating the conditions for our values to become true, right? Like we often talk about them, they need to be based in reality.
Yeah.
Like it can't be something you hope for. It actually needs to be something that you can do. Mm-hmm. So, I'd love to just maybe get 2 to 3 quick tips, tricks, like how do you weave the values into your team conversation? Like how has it just become part of the fabric of how you operate?
Dude, I had a conversation with a team member this morning, and like it's hard conversations. Like it's a hard, like, performance oriented conversation, and I just started by telling them, I was like, look, I want to look back on this conversation in a year and feel really, really proud about how you and I navigated this based on our values and based on who we are. Like I that's what I want. Like a year from now, I want to look back on this and know that we both honored to think about others first and to do what we said we would do and to own the problem. Like those are the 3 that we're going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about owning the problem, but I'm going to approach this by thinking about what is best for you. And I want you to do the same for me. And so it does not get weaved in unless there is a weaver. Like someone has to take ownership for weaving it in, putting it on the wall. Like ours are on our wall, but like that does not weave it in. Like things do not get woven unless there's a weaver, and there has to be someone who takes the responsibility to begin that pattern. And once the pattern is set, the team is able to execute it a lot more intuitively, because they know what that rhythm looks like. They know that we begin from this process.
Yeah.
They know that, like, when we talk about a hard client, that we're speaking about it from a standpoint of our values. There've been decisions, like Hannah, you mentioned, like, hey, what a team member does something that you disagree with. My team does things that I disagree with constantly. But my question is, are you going to the values? Because if you're going to the values, I will let you do something I disagree with that I think is going to fail or that I think is in not the best interest. But if it's going back to the values, if you can demonstrate to me that you are thinking about others first, that you're owning the problem, that you're doing what we said we would do, that you're making it better, that you're asking the stupid questions, that you're being fun under pressure, if you show me that, I'll give grace that I do not have omniscience on every decision that could be made. Praise God, because if it did, I would be the person everyone is coming to get the answers. And I want them to be able to internalize the values like I've internalized the values to make decisions based off of them.
Right.
And so there are many things like one of our team members said yes to a client project that was like, if I scoped it, probably would have been $7,000 or $8,000 worth of additional work. And they were like, yeah, but like this, and they needed it. And like, I think if we do this, and they showed me that they were thinking about it, I was like, if they had asked me, I would have scoped that as a paid project. But because you made the decision out of think of others first, we're going to honor it. Like, I'm not going to reverse it. I'm not going to go back to the client. We're not going to undo it. Like, we're going to see this through, and we're going to do what we said we would do, because our team backs up you when you make a decision in the best interest of the client. Like, we've got your back, even if I would not have made that same decision. But it takes someone actively choosing to weave it in.
Yeah, and that is a slippery slope though, but it is tricky. Like you would have to, do what you sounds like you did, which is like, let's talk about the situation that happened. Yeah. Tell me how this lived into the value. Okay, now I see your perspective. How do we move forward better? But you do have to talk about it. And that also, I think, is, to say like why people avoid the value sometimes. Sometimes I feel like certain people are just like, oh, saying the company values in the meeting is cheesy. Like using them as like guidelines is like, people just brush it off so easily. But I think it is a value to live into the company values every day and talk about them all the time.
Yeah.
It to exactly what you just said, it will allow for the people that you lead to make decisions when you're not in the room and still trust them, and for them to still trust themselves as well. Like, my leader will understand why I made the decision because I made it in line with our values. Yeah. Yeah.
And who wants to be the answer machine to an organization? Like, I don't remember who it was, but someone once said, like, you can either be king or you can either be king or you can be rich, but you can't be both. And like, a lot of organizations are set up to treat the CEO founder as if they're just the all-knowing, like, Pumbaa of the organization, and everyone's supposed to come and like pass it through their lens and make sure like you can do it. It's hard to grow past one person's capacity. Yeah. You're going to feel really good about yourself, but you're not going to grow.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, no, this was really great. Thank you so much for jumping on today. Is there anything that we didn't get to, or anything that you wanted to ask us maybe that you didn't get to?
Oh man, I appreciate what you guys are doing. And I like any room where there's a conversation around how to lead, like for healthy organizations to lead people into health and to serve their organizations better. Like that's a room I want to be in. That's where the conversations are happening that are actually making a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks so much for the time. As always, good to be with you. I always learn something when we talk every time. So I appreciate just your commitment to your team and how you show up and your discipline around committing to values. I think it's always inspirational and fun to hear. Yeah.
It's harder. It's the harder path.
It is harder. Amen. Truth. Truth. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, check this episode out if you want to learn more about Kairos. So Stephen, where do they find you?
KairosDigital.com. We're a marketing agency in Jacksonville, but we serve clients all over the country. And we'd be happy to chat.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
So good to see you.
You too.
Oh, man. We have so many nuggets. Where do we start? I was writing notes.
I know. I always walk away inspired when I talk to Stephen.
Me too.
I think the thing that really stands out to me is he mentioned you can't weave without a weaver. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's always stood out to me about Stephen is just he is very, very committed to being the weaver, and is not unsure or unclear about what those priorities are. And I think one of the things that we see in organizations, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, is they do values and it feels a little bit like a perfunctory exercise, but like he is committed to the ritual of values, which is bringing it up in conversation, which is making sure that people know that is how they make decisions, honoring it even when he doesn't want to, right? But knowing that that's the thing, it just gets held as this beacon in the organization. It's not about whether Stephen's having a bad day or a good day. It's about whether or not you're living into the values. And I really think that is such a difficult thing to do and to do well and stay committed to. But he's always been a really good role model and good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it leads to like one of my favorite things that we kind of kicked off the conversation about, which is psychological safety in your company. You know, creating those values, living into them, holding people accountable to living into them, then will create so much psychological safety in your company for people to make decisions when you're not there and vice versa, you know, so that you all trust and know that you're swimming in the same direction. And when you make decisions that maybe the other people might disagree with or might not have made them the same way, you can come back together and you can speak in a common language so that that psychological safety is, you know, reiterated and is upheld. I think that is it is hard to do, but it is not impossible to do, and it is something that people can practice and get better and better at. You know, one thing that I think throughout this conversation I was thinking about a lot was agencies right now, like with just so much happening in the world and in our economy. I mean, there's so much risk and there is so much pressure that I feel like you can succumb to and suffer from. But if you figure out how to provide a safe place to work, really good work will come out of it. And then you get all the financial benefits and the stability that you know, really want. So instead of just jumping to the end of like, we got to make a bunch of money so that we're safe, if you start with that in mind, the psychological safety of it, it will lead to the result that you want.
Yeah, you're actually safe because of how you behave and because of how you show up. People want to work with you. I mean, imagine, you know, choosing between Kairos and an agency that is about, you know, the quick dollar, the quick fix, long-term, you know, all the things that show different set of values, that kind of scarcity mindset, versus working with a Kairos who you know has your back, who you know has your best interest in mind, who's gonna follow through on the things that they say they're gonna follow through on. I would pay more for that, honestly, and I have, and I will again, right? Because I think there's something to be said about when you lead with your values and when you're committed to your values, other people see that and they want to join it, right? They want to be a part of it. So yeah, great conversation, great lessons. Love Stephen Freeman. Love the work that he's doing. His team is awesome. They are amazing. Definitely check them out, kairosdigital.com.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on Business Velocity. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business's momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts for more episodes that help turn your potential into performance. You can also check out the 5 Facets of Business at theevolveddifference.com. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve velocity. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.